to Truth in Love. Truth in Love is part of the Gotham Storytelling Festival here at Frigid, New York. Frigid, New York is a nonprofit theater dedicated to supporting emerging and established artists produce their original work. If you'd like to learn more or see another show here, you can visit us at our website, frigid.nyc. A couple things before we get started. First of all, the fire exits are the way you came in. In the case of an emergency, please exit that direction. Also, please take a moment to silence your cell phones. The use of flash photography is strictly prohibited at this show. I believe that's it. Without further ado, please welcome Walt Egbert.
Good evening. So, when I was 9 years old, I met my guardian angel. Now, I was in the basement of my parents' house, and we had pedal cars that we drove around the basement. And we found a loop that we could take at full speed, and there were dents and holes in the walls of the basement throughout. And there was no way that my mother could get us to get out of the basement unless it turned out that my Aunt Rachel was leaving. Now, my Aunt Rachel was the coolest person that I knew. She lived with us, and she was always looking out for things that might be interesting to us. She would often come home with food that we might like, or a book, or would expose us to all kinds of things. And she was also a lot less strict than my parents were. So when my mother announced that my Aunt Rachel was leaving, Stephen and I went bounding up the stairs, and my brother went through the front door and closed it behind him. And when I got up to the top of the stairs, it was a full plate glass door. And I looked through and I saw my Aunt Rachel was getting into the car and she was about to drive away. And I didn't think about turning the door handle. I just put both hands on the glass and at full speed went right through it. And I don't remember actually going through the glass, but I do remember landing in the bushes. And as I was sort of coming to, I was looking around, and there were no cuts on me. I had a little cut on my hand, but I think that was probably because I had cut it on the branches when I came down. And so I was kind of in a daze, and I look up and I see my mom and my Aunt Rachel had come rushing back when I went through the glass, and my brother Stephen was there. And my mother said it was like your guardian angel carried you through the door and put you down in the bushes. And I was kind of in a daze, and I was wondering why my guardian angel was now the hero of this story, and I didn't see them. I didn't know what a guardian angel was. And so I kind of picked myself up, and as I did at that age, I figured I would try to research what a guardian angel was. And in 1976, we didn't have the internet. We had the next best thing, and that was the Catholic Encyclopedia. And the version that we had was an impressive ivory leather-bound set of volumes that were on the bookshelf. And so I pulled out the volume to look up guardian angels, and I was directed to the story of St. Francis of Rome. And St. Francis of Rome lived, obviously, in Rome in the late 14th century. And at that time, the city of Rome was somewhat in decline. And there were apparently wolves wandering through the city. There were 2 or 3 popes who were all vying to be the pope. And there was a plague. So it was basically like today. And so Francis was given in marriage at the age of 12. And I remember reading this thinking, I was with her on that. She wanted to be a nun. She didn't want to get married. And I couldn't think of getting married at 9. And so she was married. And obviously a few years later, she had several children. And one of her sons died of the plague. And a little bit later, she ended up having this vision of two figures that appeared to her. And one of them stepped forward, and it was her dead son. And he's like, hey, Mom. And the other figure was bathed in glorious light. And there was a time when I wanted to be a writer, and I just was trying to find a way that I could use the term bathed in glorious light. But this figure stepped forward, and she describes him as being 9 years old with golden flaxen hair. And he announced to Frances that I am your guardian angel, and I will be with you. So that was interesting. So then her son steps forward and says, Mom, I'm paraphrasing, Mom, Agnes, my sister Agnes is going to be joining me soon. And he steps back, and then the figures disappeared. And as it turned out, soon after, Frances' daughter Agnes died as well of the plague. And so I came away with this with a couple of thoughts, and one of which was, if you're 9 years old, you should not be reading the Catholic Encyclopedia. And I also was struck by what I didn't say what the hell at that age, but so she meets her guardian angel, and yet both of her children die. And I was trying to process this. So I guess he wasn't their guardian angels and was only hers, but what about their guardian angels? I guess they didn't have any, or maybe they were sleeping on the job. And so I was just, okay, I had more questions than answers. But the other thing that I was suddenly aware of was like, well, if my guardian angel actually helped carry me through the class, what did he look like? And when I thought about it, I really hoped that my guardian angel looked like Richard Gennaro. And Richard Gennaro, I don't know if he's in the audience, Richard Gennaro I met in kindergarten, and I thought he was the most beautiful boy in the world. And he was of Italian heritage, so he didn't have golden flaxen hair. But I remember that all I wanted to do was be with him all the time. And so we were really good friends. And I thought, if I have a guardian angel, that's what I would want. But I think, with childhood friendships and things, I lost track of him. But I never forgot him, and he kind of always stayed in my mind, I think mainly because of the way that I pictured him. And so I kind of came out of this whole experience with what felt like a little secret. This little secret about having a guardian angel who might look like this cute boy, but it felt like this was something that I really couldn't share with people. It felt like this was my little secret. And I found that over the years, there were other of these little secrets that sort of started to develop. And one of them occurred on family TV night, of all things. And as a family, we played a game which was called, How Far Into a TV Show Can We Get Before My Mother Would Stand Up and Say, Turn off this garbage. And that was usually brought on by the appearance of some kind of female character who was scantily or provocatively dressed, at which point my mother would not be having it. And it was up to my father, who had the remote, to quickly change the channel when that came up, because if he didn't change the channel, my mother would get up and shut off the TV, and that would ruin it for all of us. So as I remember, one of the worst offenders when we were watching TV was we were watching the Carol Burnett show. And there was a Spanish flamenco guitarist named Charo, who some of you may have heard of. And she was buxom, she had blonde hair, high heels, and talked about coochie, 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 and she would last 5 seconds before she would be banished from the screen. And it was confusing to me because I thought it was fun. She was like a prototypical drag queen. But my mother was intent on preserving the purity of her 3 sons. So there was my older brother Stephen, myself, and my younger brother Douglas, and so that was her mission. But I noticed a trend where when we were watching Wonder Woman, and she would go through her spin and would come out with her scanty outfit, and that was not good. But then there was Steve Trevor, who would amazingly lose his shirt on occasion, and that was fine. And it was one of those things that it would go under the radar, and I would like it, and I'd have another little secret that I could put. And we watched Buck Rogers in the 25th century, and Princess Ardala would have her cape and her outfit, and she was out. Buck Rogers was fine. So that was another thing that went under the radar, another little secret I could put away. And I found that over time, I was having this situation where we were together as a family, and I was having a different experience than everyone else was. And I was keeping these little secrets, and they were just little ones. I could just kind of file them away. And then we were watching TV another day, and Anita Bryant comes out. And I knew Anita Bryant because she was Miss Oklahoma beauty queen, and she did advertisements for Florida oranges. And so we were watching, it must have been on the news after the fact, but we were watching that she was having some kind of a press conference, and she was chatting, and this guy comes out and puts a pie in her face. And I thought it was hysterical. And she has the presence of mind after to say, well, at least it was a fruit pie. And I thought that was hysterical too. But my parents were not happy about that. And it really felt like there was something more there than just, throw a pie in somebody's face, which I would totally get. And so she was kind of in the news for a while. And it turns out she was talking about saving our children and saving them from those homosexuals. And I was thinking about all of this, and, saving our children sounded good. I was watching commercials where Sally Struthers would cry about, saving the children that were hungry, and it sounded like a good idea. But I don't remember feeling like I needed to be saved in particular, and from the homosexuals. And there was something about that word that had sex in it, and there was something about that, with all of my little secrets, sounded like maybe that was about me. And so I went back to the Catholic Encyclopedia, and the version that we had didn't have anything about homosexuals. So it was very confusing, but I got the overall sense that there were people that were needing to be saved or protected, and there were people that were needing to, these people need to be protected from. So there were these good people, the bad people, good people, and I was trying to take all this in. And, this was a time when, there were liberal Republicans, conservative Democrats, and the world wasn't as ideologically split as it is now. And the Equal Rights Amendment was making its way through being ratified by the states, and we remember talking about it in school, and it would end discrimination on the basis of sex, which we all laughed at because anytime we used the word sex. But I came home to dinner, and I said, this sounds like a good idea. I mean, this, and my mom was like, no, no, no. And he looks at my father, and he's like, no, no. And my father's like, well, look, if the Equal Rights Amendment passes, women will have to go to war. I was like, okay, that sounds bad. And my mother said, and the lesbians will be able to get married, and they will kill their babies. And I was like, okay. There are a lot of words in there that I don't understand, but it sounds really, really terrible. And there were no lesbians in the Catholic Encyclopedia, and it was all very confusing to me. And so there was something happening where I was like, okay, I think I need to continue to keep my secrets. But it sounds like I know what the game is here. So we've got the people that are the good on the good side that need to be protected, and we've got these other people that need to be protected from it. I'm going to do everything I can to be on this side. And so at that age, we were all encouraged to be altar boys. And so I was like, this is an area where I can shine. So I had memorized all of the different implements that were used during the Mass, the chalice and the thurifer, and I knew all the vestments that the priest wore and all the responses, and I ascended to be president of the Altar Boy Society. So, I think I had sort of gotten the plan. This I think I got it. And so then we moved on to high school, and I went to a somewhat selective Catholic all-boys high school, and I enjoyed it. I made a lot of friends. I really had a good time. But I did find that I found myself targeted. Boys' high schools or boys in general in high school are rough and all that, but I found myself targeted, and I wasn't sure quite why. And I remember sitting in freshman English, and there were 3 boys who sat next to me, and they were intent on making my life a living hell. And one of them was a wrestler, and he said to me, hey, you want to watch us wrestle, don't you? And it was one of those things that struck me because, yes, I did, but how did you know? And you're telling me that I'm bad for wanting to watch the gay thing, and you guys are wrestling doing the gay thing. and so it was, and I honestly don't remember if this lasted a few days or a few months, but it was just brutal. And my teacher knew what was happening, and I think he looked on me with what seemed like embarrassment. He didn't intervene to stop it. And I was like, I don't think I want to bring this home because the question would be, why are they talking to you that way? So it was another little secret, that I put away. But, I thankfully wasn't too bad. I got through high school, but I was deferring any more consideration about what it was like to be gay, or whether I would be gay, or any of that. And then in 1988, I arrived at Princeton University, and I was ready to take on the world. I was excited to be there, but the fact that I ended up there ended up being a bit of a surprise. The guidance counselors had told me that the Ivy League schools didn't like Catholic school students, and I wasn't thinking too much about it, but my friend Juan was applying to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, and I was like, okay, I'll apply too. And in those days, you couldn't just download a form, and it was like near the application deadline, and I actually took his form, I whited out his answers, I made another copy and submitted my own, and I got in. And so I arrived there, excited, ready to go, and then I went headlong into culture shock. Now, coming from a Catholic high school, I wasn't exactly sheltered, but social life there was at a whole different level. And I encountered kids who had gone to prep schools and were used to living on campus, which was new to me. And then I found out that I had a Long Island accent. And I was just walking and talking and drinking the coffee that I bought, and it was apparently of nothing but amusement to everyone. And I didn't know that such a thing existed, but I was really intent on getting rid of that while I was there. And then within a few days, I was dragged by some friends to see Rocky Horror Picture Show. And I had never heard of the movie. And so I went, and we're sitting in the theater, and there are people that know like these callbacks, and they know all the songs. And I was sitting there, and I was scandalized by every second of that movie. And whether it was the cross-dressing of Dr. Frankenfurter, or it was the gender-bending characters, or whether it was Rocky in the gold trunks, my mind was blown. And I remember also feeling some excitement about that, thinking, where do I fit in this kaleidoscope? All of this seems wide open, and here I am, I'm away from home, and the possibilities seemed endless. Well, unfortunately, that ended really quickly. When I had filled out the housing form, you were asked to, in those days, I don't know if they still do this, but asked to check off if you have a particular religion that you observe. And I checked off Catholic. And within a few days of arriving, I got a call from a priest who said that he represented the Catholic chaplaincy of Princeton. I was like, okay, decided to meet with him. And so when I met him, this was Father C. John McCloskey. And he looked like a priest out of the 50s. Now, my experience with Catholic priests through the 70s, where they were all kind of chill, and they would wear macrame, and jeans and long hair, and not all of them, but there was definitely more of a vibe. And this guy had a black suit with a Roman collar, black shoes that were polished, his hair parted with Brill cream just right, and he shook his hand, Father John, and I felt like a schlub. And we decided to take a walk, and we ended up on a park bench on the campus. And Father John proceeded to talk to me about what was my background, what was my experience with Catholicism. I'm not sure if I found a way to bring in, the president of the Altar Boys Society into the conversation, but he kind of probed and kind of wanted to know, like, what were my relationships, which were none, and what my parents were like, and trying to get a lot of information. And I was a little bit unnerved by that, but then he moved on to say that he was a stockbroker. And, and he, they were looking for people who were, smart and who would be the next generation of leaders. And, there was no, he wasn't looking for people to actually become priests or have their religious life, but he was going to, elite universities, and I was all over that. And when I got there, this whole idea of being a leader and having the world in front of me was really convincing. And then he sealed the deal and said, Jesus said, those who are neither hot nor cold, they're lukewarm, I vomit them out of my mouth. I was like, oh, okay, I don't want that. I don't want that. All these thoughts I was having about having the world open to me and the kaleidoscope and all that, and maybe having to come out. I was like, okay, this I can get behind. This is good. And so we parted, and he said, well, we'll try to meet again. So what I found out later, he didn't mention Opus Dei at all. And I found out later that some of the students on campus, there was a bit of a buzz because there was a priest named Father McCloskey who had gotten the list of students from the Catholic chaplaincy and was interviewing students and asking really personal questions about their lives and their sexual lives. And I was wondering why, in this meeting, he hadn't mentioned Opus Dei at all. Now, for those of you who don't know, Opus Dei is an organization, it's called a personal prelature, and it's associated with the Catholic Church. You may have heard about it at the time that the movie The Da Vinci Code came out. And that was described as sort of this shadowy organization. There was an albino monk named Silas, and they were trying to hide the secret of Mary Magdalene being really Jesus' wife and all this nonsense. And it turned out that actually Opus Dei was concerned when the book came out, but then this story was so far off the mark that it ended up being a non-issue. The organization itself actually was founded in the 1920s in Spain by Jose Maria Escrivá, who ended up being canonized as a saint in the Catholic Church. Now, he says that he had this revelation from God directly that talked about the sanctity of work and the sanctity of life. And Opus Dei is Latin for the work of God. And the idea was that you did not need to be a religious person, you didn't need to be a priest or a nun, you could just be an ordinary person in daily life and sanctify your life by basically just being mindful and a good person. But the way this organization developed, he started to recruit people into the organization that would live at the residence, and they would give all of their income to Opus Dei. And they were tasked with recruiting more people to Opus Dei. And over the years, Spain in the 20s and the 30s, leading up to World War II, there were revolutions, and at some point he left Spain, came back. But eventually, Opus Dei became very closely tied with the fascist Franco government. And there were members of Opus Dei who were in the Franco government. And over the years, Opus Dei became more closely tied with Rome, and there were forces, and some of the popes were not at all interested in Opus Dei. But Pope John Paul became very interested and created this personal prelature for Opus Dei. And over the years, they've started to expand, and the goal is always to make their way through communities, and they've never identified themselves as Opus Dei. There's the Oak Crest School, there's the Riverside Residence, and the idea is they start to recruit, and they look for people that they think are ambitious, intelligent, and can continue to contribute to the organization. And so I didn't know any of this. I didn't know any of this. I didn't know what Opus Dei was, but over time, I started to meet with various members of Opus Dei, and we had what were called weekly circles. And a number of students would meet, and sometimes it was Father John, sometimes it was another priest, and they would have a reading from The Way, which was a book that Escriva had written, and it would include ways to conduct yourself, to be clean, to not have impure thoughts, to give your life to God, to work hard, to get up early, to not dilly-dally, and it was very controlling. And then they also encouraged us, / required us to go to daily mass. And so we had really a detailed and continuous contact with them. And I started to think about what was happening here, and most of my experience was that this was providing some direction that I felt like I needed. But then other things started to happen where I was introduced to the staff of the Princeton Tory, which was a conservative journal on campus, and I ended up writing an article called The Confessions of a Former Fetus, which was an anti-abortion article, and you could probably look it up, it's probably still in their archives. And I was then introduced to people at American Collegians for Life, which was a collegiate level anti-abortion group. And I became a secretary. And I would go down to Washington and I would meet and we would develop policy papers. And I was in this circuit where I met a number of just sort of minor policy people on the Family Research Council and the Moral Majority and all these other groups. Nobody that you would have heard of, but I was hoping maybe that would happen in the future. And so, as you know, you're in college, the idea that this is nothing but an upward trajectory, that I was involved in all these policy things and meeting people, and then it wasn't a whole lot of reflection about that. And it turned out that Opus Dei's presence in Princeton actually grew, and I ended up taking a course called Conservative Thought that was taught by a professor there. And the teaching assistants were all staffed by Opus Dei. And, on the face of it, it wasn't a promotion of conservative thought. It was, anyone could take it and you could question it. But I found that, this was all what I wanted, I thought. And I was ready to go to law school, study, constitutional law, and make policy that wouldn't affect me. A lot of it was reproductive rights policy and other things. I'm like, this is all great. So I had the professor write my recommendation. And I remember meeting with him, and I was able to tell him that my brother went to West Point, and that I was in Princeton pro-life, and all these things that he was very pleased about. And he wrote my law school recommendation. And then I had another recommendation that was written by the director of the Opus Dei house in New York City. And just kind of big picture stepping back, I think about how, how everything that I had done, how these people really influenced my getting into law school. And I was excited that these people were writing my recommendations. So I ended up going to law school. I went to Fordham Law School. And, interestingly enough, I wasn't in quite as close contact with Opus Dei at that time, but a couple of guys introduced themselves to me, again, not calling out Opus Dei in particular, but mentioned mutual acquaintances, and I got it. And so we formed study groups, and we got together. And at the time that I was in law school, I was actually going in the evening, and I was working as an aerospace engineer at the same time. And it turned out that there was one of the classes that I was working on with them, and I was really having a hard time. And I was finding I was working all day long and studying and reading on my spare time. That was difficult. So the classes were hard, and I felt like I was struggling in at least one of these classes. And I remember that at the end of the semester, they suddenly disappeared. And I was kind of baffled by that. I was very much aware of the fact that I came back to this thought about Opus Dei looking for the best and the brightest, and the fact that I was struggling, did they drop me because I wasn't smart enough? And I was suddenly very disappointed. And some of you may have come here thinking, well, how did he get out of the Opus Dei cult? And it seems like they actually dropped me. And it ended up being a bit of a blessing in disguise. Nothing ended up changing for me in the sense that I still believe that being gay was wrong, and the church and its authority and all of these things, but I didn't have sort of the daily intervention of daily mass and people from Opus Dei, kind of involved with me on a daily basis, that I started to at least start to think about some other things. And it was in 1998 that I was walking to the office and I picked up a copy of the New York Times. And in those days it was actually a physical paper, and I opened it up and there was a full page ad. And it was a woman with an engagement ring. And the headline said, "I'm living proof that the truth can set you free." And it turned out this was a multi-million-dollar ad by the right wing. It was called Truth in Love. And the premise of this ad campaign was that if you accepted Jesus, you could become straight. You just had to open your heart and pray, and when God calls, he doesn't hang up. And this is all in the ad. And this hit me like a ton of bricks, because I had spent 30 years believing that I was broken, and that I had tried praying, I had tried living my life, I had tried having the right attitude, but I was still gay. And I knew that something had to change. And it would be nice to say that in that moment I pulled out the rainbow flag and came out and everything was great. But those days after that were probably the darkest of my life. And I would often go to bed crying, trying to figure out what do I do? How do I live my life? And I had become so used to essentially outsourcing my conscience to the church. And I had only certain voices talking to me. I wouldn't read a book unless it had the imprimatur of the church, that this was sanctioned reading. And suddenly, it was on me to create my own conscience and be okay with who I was. And this was a really long period. And I think I decided at this time, unlike in the past, I was not going to keep these little secrets, and I was not going to do this on my own. And so I called up the LGBT Center in New York and asked about their coming out resources. And they said they didn't have any. And I was like, okay, and I said, but there's Identity House, which is over on 14th Street, and they might be able to help you. And I went there, and I remember this idea of being in these very out LGBT spaces that I was so uncomfortable, because it felt like, do I belong here? This is not what I was used to. And I remember starting to talk to people and gradually coming to a place where, okay, I think I can do this. And so I made very, very tenuous forays out into the world. I wasn't meeting any humans, but I was on AOL chat groups and chatting with people, and I was very careful to not reveal my identity or my job or my location. And I was having a chat, and I must have slipped up because I must have said that I was a lawyer. And someone that I was chatting with said, hey, there's this show called Will and Grace, and he's a gay lawyer. And I was like, oh, okay. And it didn't click with me because I wasn't out, and he, so I'm like, okay, so this is a place that we could start with. And we chatted for what seemed like months. And then we spoke on the phone. And his name was Brian. And I was just so struck by, he was talking about things that he worked on and things that he was interested in. And I could talk about things, and I could make comments about Gil Gerard, Steve Trevor and Buck Rogers, and it was okay. And so we spoke on the phone for a long time, and then we finally met in person. And we ended up meeting in a bar called Revolution, which was in Hell's Kitchen. It's actually gone now, but we met, and I wasn't scared off, and we were able to have a conversation, and then we went to dinner, and we continued to have a conversation. And it was just such an experience to feel like I can be now totally myself. I felt like an idiot, but I was like, at least I can be myself. And we decided to walk down from, 43rd Street, all the way down to the Village, because at that point there weren't any gay bars in Hell's Kitchen at that point. And so we were walking downtown, and he gets a call from his roommate, and this was like the safety call. Are you okay? Is he a psycho? Do you need an excuse to be there? And apparently, all systems go. And all we did was we kind of walked around the Village over those few days. And it was just such a revelation to kind of feel like I could be myself. And from there, I was like, okay, I think I can start to come out. And I came out to my best friend, who actually came out to me at the same time. We were in high school together. Neither of us knew we were gay. And then I came out to my brothers, and then I came out to my parents. And that went horribly. And they had said that they were totally surprised and shocked that I was gay. And at the moment, I was so angry and felt like, how can you not see me? And then I thought about how I had just gone through this journey of 30 years of denying to myself that I was gay. And I felt like maybe I could give them the grace to have some time to deal with their denial about it. So, fast forward, Brian and I got married. And I have 2 kids that are actually here. And my parents gradually came around to it. And I remember being this moment where Brian and I walked into Splash Bar, which no longer exists. And what was playing at the time was Cher's song Believe. And no gay coming out story is going to be complete without a reference to Cher or Madonna. And so Believe was playing, and it's kind of, it's my coming out song. And, you know, the lyrics go, do you believe in life after love? And it's an odd thing for it to be a coming out song as I was starting to get to know Brian and I was falling in love. But the way that I'm seeing it is there was a love that I was giving up. And I was giving up this love for, you know, what wasn't any longer. It was a love for the feeling safe. It was a love for an image of me that didn't exist. It was a love for these secrets that I was keeping, and I was giving all of that up. And sometimes as I think about my guardian angel, and I think about whether or not he does look like Richard Gennaro, and, you know, is he now an adult, or is he still, you know, 9 years old? And as I thought about it, I said, you know, maybe my guardian angel, maybe the one who's looking out for me, maybe that's actually me. Thank you.